All right, 2 down, 1 to go, and it's going to be a big one as well. Sincere thanks once more for Mirwan kind of opening up and telling his story here, a riveting one, no doubt. I'm looking around the room and seeing, is Alberto Colombo's there? Okay, I know you hadn't arrived yet, so he's here. We've got both panelists ready to talk in our final panel, which is going to focus on one of the hottest topics in international football, which is the match calendar. When is enough enough? Are players overworked? Are they not getting enough rest? What does that mean for all the different stakeholders? For the players themselves, obviously, but for the leagues, the competitions, the governing bodies. How can we find balance? How can we find an equilibrium between getting the most out of all the competitions, making it as sustainable as possible in every single way, financially, but physically as well? So for our final panel, I'm delighted to welcome here on stage our 2 distinguished guests. We'll start with Maheta Molango, who's the Chief Executive of the Professional Football Association in England and a member of the FIFPro board, and also Alberto Colombo, Managing Director and General Secretary of the European Leagues. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for following the last 2 sessions. Alberto, you pretty much landed, sprinted over here, yes, and join us here on stage. This is a particularly relevant time for us to speak because we're how many days away now from the largest World Cup ever? Starts, I guess, on the 11th. So what, a little bit, 2 weeks before the World Cup kicks off. And my first question to both, kind of just to get us going here, is how do you look at the prospect from your respective standpoints and perspectives? How do you look at the perspective of another summer where the top players are going to be in action again? They're not going to get much rest. They're not going to get much time to prepare for the next season. How do you look at this summer right now from your respective organizations' interests? Starting with you, Maheta.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us. Well, I found the analogy made previously by President Suarzo very interesting because when he compared players with cows, I found it quite interesting. And I think the problem is that those cows are running out of milk. And I think there's only so much milk that can be produced. And that's the problem. The problem is that this is not a shoe factory. It's not, a development of a cow elevator or whatever it's called. Those are human beings who unfortunately cannot produce that level of milk every year. And I think we have reached a point where, don't get me wrong, I think, most people would not feel a lot of sympathy for millionaires who are complaining about playing too much because, when you do that and you're in a taxi towards the stadium and you say that your taxi driver says to me, mate, I woke up at 4 a.m. this morning, my shift finishing at 8, so as you can imagine, the concern about this guy who's a millionaire is not quite, I'm not losing sleep on that. Now, however, the problem now is that same taxi driver happened to be a Chelsea fan. And because they milk too much Cole, now Cole is not quite ready to go to the World Cup. And guess what? This same guy is an English fan. And we've not won a World Cup since '66. So he would have loved to see his country win the cup, but Cole cannot be there. And yet he's the most talented, or one of the most talented players that we have in England. And that same guy, seen that because the club went to Club World Cup, guess what? Maresca is sacked, Liam Rosnier is sacked, and now they'll have a new manager, and hopefully for him, he's going to be able to figure out how he can put 11 people on the pitch despite having 25 starters that don't even fit in the dressing room. So, unfortunately, we live in a world of where the people who are supposed to protect the game, to be the parents of the game, have decided to put economic profit above the quality of the show, and that's pretty distressing, even to those who wake up at 4 in the morning, because those are the people who still pay the full price for the season ticket. And they say, it's very unfair. I pay 100% of my ticket, yet I get 70% of my show. And this is our problem.
Plenty to get into then. Thank you, Maheta. Alberto.
Yes. First, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Pedro. Thanks, Andrea, for the kind invitation. Yes, I wear the hat also now of a league and put this into perspective of a competition organizer, right? Yes, it is a disruptive summer, right? It's a long World Cup, the longest World Cup ever. I mean, we cannot forget that it's the first World Cup to be played with 48 national teams instead of 32, and this requires an additional week. It's the longest ever release window that we had for players, and to be honest, the disruption for league's competition organizer started actually even before the start of the World Cup. You know, exactly because of the release of players. You know, we have leagues that are still playing their playoff matches, and everybody knows how these matches in a few leagues are fundamental for the perspective of a league or for the perspective of a club or of a player, right? Because what is at stake could be whether an European qualification or also the promotion or the relegation. You know, so that there is a lot of stake, and there are clubs that are obliged to release a player, and leagues and clubs that didn't receive any level of protection or exception in order to have them on the pitch because they need to leave and play for the World Cup, when exception has been granted, for instance, to clubs that participate in the final tomorrow, right? So exception granted to confederation international club competition, but not to domestic leagues. Just to mention that the level of disruption is not only over the summer or after the summer. And of course, you know, players will come back for the World Cup, they will join their clubs, they will go on holiday. If it's going to be probably a short holiday, they will join then the clubs, and of course, those players that have been playing the World Cup, they will be a bit less prepared for the beginning of the season, and this, you know, could affect a bit the integrity of the competition, especially on those clubs with a lot of players. And then let's not forget that this is going to be also a special season and a special summer, because it's the first year where in autumn we will have the introduction of the new quadruple header on the international match calendar, right? So the season got squeezed. UEFA club competition is starting 1 week before. There is only 1 week between the draw of UCC and the first match day, right? And this creates a lot of operational issues for those that needs to organize the fixtures in the various leagues. Last but not least, we tend always to think about the big Premier League competition, whether this is the Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, or the Bundesliga. Let's not forget that we have leagues that play during the summer, right? Like the Scandinavian one, and they need basically to stop for a long period, and this is a super disruptive season for league business for those that are playing in the north of Europe.
All right, thank you for setting the stage for us. Maheta, I know there's a lot of research that you've done into the impact that the current match calendar has on the players' well-being. I know you prepared some slides, correct? That we had, I got some information about slides that...
Luckily for you, it was not me preparing the slides.
Okay. We had some slides here. I don't know if you have them there. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to...
Ideally, you give me a mic to run through some of the slides.
Okay, I didn't know it was you who'd be doing it. So... Okay. Here. Maybe you can introduce yourself and then take us through the slides.
So we had a quick, or we had a little bit of a hiccup here in terms of the sequencing, but it doesn't matter. What I would suggest, because we have probably 10 minutes of slides just to set the scene a little bit. I'm not sure if this is
10 minutes of slides.
If this is probably a bit too disruptive, but maybe I can just point to a couple of slides now that you can integrate a little bit into the conversation with Maheta and the rest, if that works for you. By the way, my name is Alexander. I represent FIFPro, the Global Player Trade Union, to which also the PFA is a member. And Maheta is both the chief exec of the PFA and a board member at FIFPro. And obviously, we have been working on the congested match calendar for a number of years together with the leagues as well in terms of legal cases. And I just probably point the panel to a couple of highlights. But maybe we can first look to a quick video to actually hear from the players themselves.
I think it's a general opinion of the players, and if it keeps this way, it will be a moment that we have no other option. But let's see, I don't know. It's something that worries us because we are the guys that suffer.
So when you talk about performance, we play like already 60 games in the year. You have the Hero, you have the World Cup, we have now the National League. You have so many competition, and we are happy to play, but when it's too much, it's too much. We have to recover. We have to stay relaxed. If people want to have quality in the game, if they just want to see some games to see on the TV, of course we're gonna play. But if they want to see quality game, to see emotion, to see this type of thing, that's make the beauty of the football too. I think we have to respect the health of the players.
Sometimes nobody asks the players what they think about adding more games, so maybe our opinion doesn't matter, but everybody knows what we think about that, having more games. Everybody is tired of that.
Estoy de acuerdo en todo lo que ha dicho. Cada año tenemos más partido, menos tiempo de descanso, y al final no es falta de decirle. Creo que venimos de 3, 4, incluso más años diciéndole, nadie nos hace caso. Así que sí, va a llegar un momento donde vamos a tener que ir a la huelga, porque es la única manera de hacer nuestra voz entendible para los que deciden.
We are not robots, so I think we just definitely have to looking after that and reduce the game definitely, and can play better. Quality of game is definitely, I think this is should be the aim.
Yo sé que la PFA tuvimos una reunión a principio de temporada sobre los calendarios. Sabemos que es un calendario muy apretado, sé que el sindicato también, entonces nosotros confiamos en ellos completamente, de que ellos buscan nuestros intereses, son ellos los que nos están cuidando y están haciendo todo lo posible para poder ayudarnos en ese sentido. Ahora mismo el calendario es el que es, hay que tirar para adelante y hay que jugar a fútbol, entonces ya lo hemos hablado muchas veces, sabemos que el calendario es el que es y es muy congestionado, pero bueno, es nuestro trabajo y hay que dar el 100% siempre.
Peut-être cette année ça va aller, mais c'est l'année prochaine qui va être un problème. Je pense qu'il y a déjà des de PFA et des autres PFA dans des autres pays, ils ont essayé de trouver des solutions, mais le problème c'est que l'UEFA, le FIFA, il fait des matchs en plus et on peut essayer de dire quelque chose, mais ouais, on n'a pas trouvé une solution et ils s'en foutent. C'est l'argent qui parle.
Maybe just building on what Kevin said here at the end, let me jump to one specific part of the presentation, because what he was talking about was actually the knock-on effect on the players after a couple of seasons where we had changes to the competition formats, where we had new competition formats being introduced, specifically also the Club World Cup. And sometimes, obviously, in terms of injuries, player performance, that impact might not be immediate, right? But it might come a little bit later. So here you see a little bit some of the reported public injury statistics actually from teams that have been participating in the Club World Cup. And I think there you can actually see specifically the impact that we can pick up in terms of some of the evidence, in terms of what that creates actually as a knock-on effect later on for competitions and on the players. And this is something that unfortunately we have pointed out in our research, as you said, Pedro, for quite a while. And sometimes it's unfortunate to be right, but in this case we actually are. So you see here the baseline year for competition for Phil Foden, the season 23-24, where he played 72 matches, and that was actually the year before we could see the effective competition changes in terms of new club competition formats or the Club World Cup kicking in. And based on his performance in the year 23-24, which was one of the standout years, where he played 72 matches, the prediction was basically on the new competition formats to reach 77 or 83, which until then was a bit unimaginable because you just simply wouldn't necessarily get there, and was still a prediction on our side. And when you actually compare that to what is forecasted for some of the players this season with the World Cup, those players go far into the 70s and indeed into the 80s. But what you unfortunately also can see is that Phil Foden's career didn't progress as you see here. And I think this is really specifically something that Maheta can comment on because he's much closer actually to that case. But I think that links to something that Maheta discussed beforehand, that we can see here the cumulative effect that we can have with congested calendars on the players. The case of Cole Palmer was already mentioned. I think Phil Foden also falls into that category. And here you have the 3 consecutive years of Cole Palmer with very little rest in between these seasons. And now a very difficult year that followed the Club World Cup for the player in terms of both performance and injury. That has now led to a non-nomination for the World Cup. And I think in the same context, obviously also I think the risk for young players is something that we have done a lot of work on with our high performance network. So those are conditioning, performance coaches, medical experts actually within the club environment. The chair is actually Darren Burgess, who has been working for Arsenal at the moment, is a performance director at Juventus. And here you just see actually the minutes Lamine Yamal played before the age of 19, right? And the comparison is to other players who will play the World Cup this year. And we obviously see that there's significant pressure on young players. Now, there are 2 stories to that, right? One is probably we have gotten much better in terms of the transition, the player pathways from the academies to the pro clubs. But when you see the stories of Phil Foden and others, and also Lamine Yamal right now, then there's obviously also a key question in terms of safeguards also for young players. So those are some of the aspects that we're discussing where the data points into a clear direction. And back to you, Pedro.
Thank you so much, Alex, because I think these numbers, can we get the microphone back, please, Alex? Thank you so much. No, but those are really relevant numbers, and I'm glad we pulled them up. And Alberto, I'm going to go back to you in a minute, but I just want to follow up with Maheta to react to these facts and figures that your colleague from FIFPro exposed. You talked about the Cole Palmer example. We saw also with Phil Foden, 2 of the big surprises in the omission of England's World Cup squad, no doubt. We've talked about performance. What about well-being?
I mean, look, again, I think I don't come here to ask for anyone's sympathy. Again, I think the players themselves, as you've heard, want to play. They understand they're privileged people. I think to be able to turn your passion into your work is something that they work hard for, but it's a privilege, and they get that. But again, I think the problem that we have is that ultimately, each of the calendar makes sense in isolation, but then when you start looking at the calendar in a cumulative way, then they don't make sense. So to the example of last year, and I think this last summer was very interesting because even the players really understood what we tried to say to them over the years. So last summer, what happened is you've got people who have played the Champions League final on the 31st of May. Within 4 days, they are expected to be with the national team from the 5th of June until the 10th of June. Within 4 days, then those same guys are expected to go to the US to play in a tournament in extreme heat conditions from mid-June to mid-July. And then those same guys are expected to start the first competitive game in early August. So how can this make sense, And then obviously then you think, okay, maybe it's me being skeptical, I don't know, but maybe it's for the room to say, but is it a coincidence that Real Madrid has not won anything this year? Chelsea has not won anything this year, and they sacked 2 managers. Man City, credit to Arsenal, by the way, I've got a few Arsenal fans in the room, so credit to them, but Man City has not won the Champions League, not won the title. Inter Milan, great team, they lost against Bodo Glimt. Great. I don't challenge the fact that this Norwegian team is great, but have they won because they were better, or have they won because they were fitter? And I think our concern is, I think it's very concerning if this becomes the survival of the fittest. It cannot be right. It cannot be right that this becomes the survival of the fittest, because the reality of football is that people say to you, oh, it's only 1%. Yeah, but that's the 1% that pays my salary, his salary certainly, because it's very expensive, and most salaries in this room. People don't pay to watch Maeta Molango. I was one of those 99%, no one gives a shit about me. So at some stage, we either see the reality and we take our mask off and stop being into demagogy, and we acknowledge that ultimately, I want to see Lamine Yamal. I want to see Jude Bellingham. And if not, it's not quite the same product because the cows that the gentleman was referring to are not the same cows. They're different cows. And they don't produce all the same milk. And that's the problem.
Alberto, the story with the players is quite a clear one here, and these numbers help us understand that. Take us into the discussions that you have with your fellow leagues, because as opposed to maybe what many of us may think, obviously you're not just speaking with the top 5 or the top 10, you're really literally traveling across the European football landscape and speaking to all the different leagues. What are those conversations like, and what are those conversations then like as a representative, senior representative of the European leagues that you have with other stakeholders to make them see the importance of listening to your viewpoints and the impact of not listening to you?
Yes, so a bit of context. First, for a competition organizer, right, like a league at domestic level, calendar is the major asset, right? It's one of the primary tasks of a league organization is to organize the fixtures, and this comes before commercializing the product to the market. And look, there is a system in place so that also the audience can also understand, how the calendar works and who has the priority of picking the various days, right? There is a system in place that works since already several years that the first organization that picks the days is FIFA, right? FIFA set the international match calendar and decide what are the best days for the national teams to play, right? This is just to stress that there is every competition organizer is there to try to pick what are the best dates for their competition. But there is a order set, and this order is set by a governance and certain regulation that exists since several years, right? So FIFA pick the first dates, then comes UEFA that picks, and the various confederation, right, that picks the date for the international competition, club competition, and then comes the leagues that they need to adapt to what is left into the calendar. And maybe this adaptation exercise in the past has been a bit easier than nowadays, but of course with the trend that is in front of the eyes of everybody that international competition are growing and are expanding the calendar, whether it's UEFA with the new format, whether it's the longer World Cup, whether the introduction of the Club World Cup, this adaptation it became a bit of a struggle, right? And this it is at the very core of the discussion within the European leagues and the very core of the discussion with the various stakeholders, not only at the international level, but also at domestic level. Why the calendar is so important? Because the calendar is the trigger of what I could define, of a chain or interconnected and multiple impact that are suffered by the leagues, right? And a congested calendar brings first operational disruption, right? Operational disruption for the leagues. You need to organize the fixtures. You have less date available. There are more sandwich matches, those matches that are in the middle of international matches. There are new dynamics related to international competition that are played in the middle, for instance, of the winter window, and so on. But on the other hand, also there are commercial and financial consideration to be made, because when you go to the market and you present your product, if FIFA and UEFA bring to the market a new product that has an expanded calendar, the product is more robust. It might also be more interesting because the format is more interesting, and for sure the new UCC format is super interesting with the league phase. But you basically present to the market a product that catch a much higher attention for the various broadcaster, and this as a consequence, of course, also on the leagues that fight for the same share of the market. Of course, the smaller are the competition, the biggest is the impact, right? Especially on those countries where there is only one broadcaster, right? And lately we have been seeing in the middle of the sales process now of UC3 that there are a few countries where it's absolutely clear that broadcasters tend to prioritize the acquisition of the Champions League or international competition. You know, the big properties leagues-wise have been, let's say, quite competitive in the latest tender, but I think we can see what happened to France and also what is the trend in a big country like Italy. Last but not least, and I think it is one of our major point of discussion that we will have with the other stakeholder in the upcoming, let's say, weeks and months, is that the product is bigger, but also the revenue cake is bigger, and the way that you redistribute this bigger cake of revenues will have a major impact on domestic competition, right? We know that the same way that there are the same players that play international competition, you know, the same clubs tend to be always qualified or tend to qualify regularly to international competition, are those that are collecting the bigger share of revenues. These create potentially, but this is more than a potential things, a disruption of what could be the competitive balance at domestic level. And this is something that we are ready to address in the upcoming weeks and months, you know, to UEFA and the other stakeholder in Europe. You know, we are also happy to have the same level of discussion with FIFA, but I think they are still a bit late in the way they want to share the solidarity of the Club World Cup that happened last year. But having said that, it's fundamental. So the level of impact hit multiple dimensions. Calendar disruption for operational point of view, the commercialization of the league product and their value in the market, and the competitive balance that, if we want, is the most important asset of a competition, right? You want a competition that needs to be unpredictable, that is interesting for the fans, and if you eat or damage this specific dimension of football, then you might have a serious problem in the long term.
We've seen globalization obviously take center stage in the football industry, and domestic leagues are competing not just in their respective market, but with the big leagues and the big competitions that obviously are getting more and more attention at the expense of the prominence of those respective leagues in smaller to mid-sized countries as well. What are some of those examples that you can share, and you've touched on it a little bit here, about the narrative you try to take to the big international organizations and the confederations and the stakeholders in order to make sure that there's a balance? And what could that balance look like? What are some of your demands, let's say, or some of your requests?
Well, first there is a common ground, right? Because international competition and domestic competition are interconnected, right? So we need to coexist together, and let's not also forget that domestic competition are the one that qualify clubs to international competition, you know, so that the access is frame in that context. Look, I will start for what I've just stressed in my previous intervention. I think what is fundamental is a more attention for a more equal and fair redistribution of the revenues that are generated at international level. That I think is becoming probably a priority for league football, right? Not to allow that the expansion at domestic level is basically implemented at the expenses of the domestic competition. When it comes to calendar, I think that we have to make no one or two step back, you know, before talking about technical solution. We need to be at the table, and I'm pretty sure this is something where Maheta will be also happy to comment. You know, at the moment the league are not at the table in order to take collective decision or with the international governing body on how to structure the calendar. Of course, there is a huge difference between the current governance model at FIFA and at UEFA. You know, at UEFA there is a proper stakeholder engagement, a proper process in place. The leagues are at the table. We have a member in the HESCO. We have a member in the club competition committee. We are part. There is a proper consultation. The governance probably is far from being perfect, but we are there. When it comes to FIFA, in order to have an impact on the way that the calendar is built, first we need to be at the table, you know. And we are not at the table, the players are not at the table, and this is the background for us also making the brave challenge, the brave decision to take a legal challenge against FIFA.
What's your reaction to that, Maheta, especially when it comes to the dealings you may have with FIFA? And I also wanted to get your views on the value of scarcity as far as the product is concerned, the product of football, and you've drawn comparisons before with the NFL, which obviously has a very short season and is generating astronomical figures when it comes to media rights and attention around the world. Clearly, and these are conversations that I have a lot in the football community, where when is too much just too much? Of football constantly on. So a reaction in the stakeholder engagement with FIFA, and then talking about this element of scarcity of less is more.
Well, I think it needs to start by putting back the game at the center of our project. Frankly, I go to a lot of meetings and I'm thinking, we speak about everything except the quality of the game. So this is like you going to the board meeting of Apple and them talking about everything except the next iPhone. Then you have a problem. You cannot talk about the lighting, the salespeople, the location of the shop, any chance of talking about how we can improve the quality of the show. So for us, football has a real conceptual problem, which is, the rooms are full of people who have not played the game, have not coached a team, have not been executive, so it's very difficult for you to be able to make decisions that make sense if you don't understand what the reality on the ground is. And second, I think there's an urgent need to acknowledge that, unfortunately, it's not all about the money. Sometimes you need to acknowledge that and if you as an authority have put the money on top of the quality of the show, then we have a real problem. Because, by the way, stop comparing the World Cup with the Super Bowl, because it's a complete different proposal. And that's what makes football different from other things, because for us it's quasi-religious. So when you organize a World Cup, what you should be caring about is making sure that the people can go and watch the game because it's their pride, it's their country. It's not the Super Bowl. And the day it becomes the Super Bowl, then we have a problem because we are worse than them at organizing Super Bowls. And that's the problem. We should be focusing on what we're good at, not aligning ourselves with stuff that we're not good at, or probably there are better people that do a better job than us on that. However, the Super Bowl does not have the emotional attachment that we have, because I was lucky enough to be for 4 years a CEO of a club in Spain, and I had American investors. And guess what? When you buy a franchise in the US, what you buy is a spot in the NBA. And today you're in Phoenix and tomorrow you can be in Las Vegas. This will never happen in football. And guess what? They try to copy that almost quasi-religious attachment to your brand. So I just think that the problem we have is that those who are supposed to preserve the game, to put the game at the center of the project, have decided to do otherwise. And I think that's a big problem. And now I got animated and I forgot the second question. What was the second question?
No, as far as the stakeholder engagement and the discussions that you have with FIFA.
I mean, look, I think when two adults are not able to reach a solution, I think it's good sometimes to have a third party looking at it. And I think there's nothing wrong about that. I think it's natural that that's what will happen in any other walks of life. However, I think that if we want to call football a family, I think typically you don't want to go to court with your family members. So I think we're not losing hope that we can at some stage be back at the table and have sensible discussion. I think we don't need to agree. And it's fair to say that in the case of UEFA, we don't always agree. But it's also fair to say that I think we managed to gain people's respect in Europe. And I think this started by being very self-critical and acknowledging that maybe FIFA Pro maybe was not fit for purpose. And therefore, before you ask people to to get you a seat at the table, you need to be clean, you need to be able to do things properly, you need to be able to be someone that people can disagree with but respect. And I think we're not. And we went on a mission to say we need to reform ourselves, we need to be better, we need to be, I think, a solid organization. And then once we've done that, then you can go and demand things from people. And I believe that in fairness to UEFA, they've said, well, listen, come to the table. By the way, it should be a given. So I'm not celebrating to have a seat at the table, because that should be a given in the first place. But the reality is that we do have a seat at the table. It's not perfect. I think we all need to do better. But I think I commend them for, I guess, engaging in a dialogue, which we've not always been able to have at other level of the, of the football industry.
I wanted to play devil's advocate with you, Maheta, just in light of various conversations that I've had with football fans around the world and other professionals who follow the game, where they could say, okay, there are more matches because clubs want to make more money, but they want to make more money to get the best players, because the best players are increasingly more expensive. And the element of overworking the players are that 1% or that small percent that also are the highest earners. Would there be a chance for players to consider plateauing their salary? Or, of course, it's a conversation more with agents many times than the players themselves, but how do you look at that ecosystem and the rising transfer fees, rising salaries, and how can different stakeholders get together and see what is sustainable? Because if players are playing too much, maybe they play less, but they earn less as well.
I think it's a fair point to raise, and I think I would respond to that devil's advocate, two things. I would say, first of all, saying that there's a correlation between the number of games played and the salary of the player being increased is a myth. Is a myth. Or at best, a misleading statement. Because as our friends from the league and from the club will tell you, the players are paid by their clubs. And when they go on international duty, we call it a free ride. They go and play for the national team effectively for free, because the data say that the upcoming World Cup, which is going to be generating apparently north of 9 billion, less than 3% goes into the pocket of the players. Fact. So it's a myth. It's a myth. So when people increase the number of teams in the World Cup, when people organize new national team competition, it does not get into the pocket of the players. Now, true, it has an effect, which is the money goes into the pockets of the federation, which in theory, most of them reinvest into grassroots, reinvest into stuff that we believe is good on. But then give credit to the players. Because when I go and negotiate certain things with the federation at times, I don't have the feeling that there's gratitude. I don't have that feeling. So I think the first point is that is a myth. And the second one is, I think, and because I was myself a player, but then subsequently I became the CEO of a club, I am yet to see a player turning up with a gun to put on someone's head to say, pay me X. No. What happens is you are not brave enough to say no. This is the reality. Because if I make 10 and my wife wants me to spend 12 and my kids ask me to spend 16, no one is putting a gun onto my head to spend 17. And I should not be turning to the government and say, dear Keir Starmer, can you please put a rule to protect myself against myself? That's not right. Now, what I need to say, however, is I am not brave enough to say no to my fans who want the best striker, and I need to keep them, I need to pay more. I need to be brave enough to say no to my owners. This is a reality. And, we're having now a discussion in England around a reform of the financial fair play regulations in League One, and you discover that certain people are paying £15,000 a week to your players in League One. You need to go and see the psychologist. You need to go, if you pay someone in League One 15 grand a week, you have a psychological problem, go and get it checked. And this is the head of the union who's saying that. Because it's nonsensical. Because those are the same clubs who, by the way, we assessed it, and if tomorrow all players in League One decided to play for free because they love the club, the badge, and all these kind of things, 50% of them would still be losing money. If tomorrow in the third tier of English football, all the club were to play for free because they love the badge, love Lincoln City, I played for them, fantastic, play for free, 50% would still be losing money. So football has a structural problem. Because some of those clubs do not belong to that category. Because if you are Bolton, you've got a big stadium, a big fan base, that, unfortunately for you, unless you're in the Premier League, you ain't gonna be able to square this up. So stop kind of saying lies about the fact that let's reduce how much we spend on players. No. First of all, get proper owners who care about the game and understand that this is a community investment. And second, get a proper CEO. Because if I work in a normal company and I spend consistently 20% more than the budget, I need to be sacked. And my company would be called a failed business and go into bankruptcy. So why do we need to allow this happen in football? But it's not the fault of the regulation, it's the fault of the people who own those clubs in the wrong way, or those who run those clubs in a way that is temeraria in Spanish.
You're very, very clear in the way that you see the football industry. I think professionalization in all standards of the game has grown, certainly in my lifetime, but the emotional nature of the game continues to prevail when it comes to a lot of the decision-making. And you know as well as I do that many people who are involved in the game have never worked in any other corporate businesses before, and they are taken by these emotions when they are making decisions that end up being obviously not sustainable for the ecosystem. Alberto, you talked about the change in format in a variety of international competitions in a bid to make it more interesting, more engaging, more successful, more viable, more commercially attractive. What can the leagues do to make their products more attractive? And I'll speak from personal example, and you know this very well. You live in Portugal. I live in Portugal. It's a league where many times at certain points, the top clubs are beating the smaller clubs. There's no upsets going to happen. You know, especially when decisions are on the line. It's just not as an appealing product as it could be with a different competition model. As a fan, I feel strongly about that. Leagues have played with different formats. They've tried to make their own respective competitive models more attractive to fans and to broadcasters. Are leagues self-critical enough about exploring options to make themselves be better and be more competitive in the European football landscape?
Yes. First, there are fantastic examples of several of medium and small leagues in our network that during the past few years they have been adapting and changing a bit their format. I mean, it's the case of Denmark or the case of Greece, Belgium, they made an experiment. It has been the case in the Polish Ekstraklasa for a few years, and there are a few others, right? Adapting a bit to the landscape and introducing playoff and playoff and play out and try to create a more interesting and appealing second half of the season. And this is probably also connected to what we said before, the changing landscape and predominance of international competition made that, as an effect, made that these leagues were becoming a bit less competitive, and there was maybe one club or two clubs. Those clubs participated regularly to international competition that were dominating, and there were a few leagues that were basically handing in February, right? In February you already know what is the champion because he's 20 points ahead. That's not something good for the leagues. It's not something good for the fans. It's not something good for the commercial partners, and therefore I think that it is wise for medium and small leagues to look at these and to try to being a bit creative on this respect. On the other hand, the big leagues are built on traditions, and I think that is absolutely normal, fair, and correct that they keep their round-robin structure and organization that has been successful over several decades, and I think that their focus is more on the promotion of the product, on the internalization of the product, than rightly on changing the format.
Understood. As we get here to the end of our conversation, and I don't know if there are any questions here for either Maheta or Alberto as we begin to wrap, but if there could be a workable solution to your respective issues in the game now, where would it start? What would be the necessary steps? What would be the pathway towards finding an ecosystem that is more balanced, that is more sustainable from your respective viewpoints? Maybe start with you, Maheta.
Well, I don't want to speak for Alberto, but I think, first of all, the start is stop the encroachment. Because when you look at the reality of the leagues, they have not changed in whatever number of years. What has changed is other people trying to encroach and then forcing people to scramble to find a solution. So I think people not encroaching would be a good start. But from our perspective, as I said to you before, I think it's putting back the quality of the show at the center, and therefore is acknowledging that those guys and ladies who are on the pitch are people who are privileged, they make a good living, and therefore they need to be pushed, but to the human boundaries. So therefore you need to let the science say what is the limit that you can push a human being, which is a privileged person that is very talented, but you need to push them to the boundary because they're well paid. And for us, you probably have three solutions. One would be a maximum number of games, but immediately you'll get in the territory of having a fight between national team and clubs, because when you get to game 58 and the maximum is 60 and there is a Champions League final coming up and the Euros, then what do? Then automatically you've got a fight between national team and club, which we don't want. The players are very proud to go and play for the national teams. I think it'd be nice from time to time for the national team to acknowledge that the clubs are paying their salaries, but that's just me. And then I guess the second solution would be, so that one would discard. The second one would be a maximum number of back-to-backs, because the science says that the more consecutive game you play in a small interval of time, the more risk of injury you have. But frankly, if you ask a player, do you prefer to train or to play? 99% say to you, I'd rather play than train. So therefore, if we are to make a concession because we want to make a concession, then I think that would be a concession to be made. And therefore, you are left with the solution that I think everyone understands, which is every normal person needs a break. So we would like to find a way to give a protected summer break to the players, because they need it physically, because they need it mentally, and because we need to protect the quality of the show. I want the example of the taxi driver that I speak to oftentimes to say, I pay money for that season ticket, but at least I get value for my money, which is unfortunately not the case right now. That would be our solution.
Thank you, Maheta. Alberto, closing words.
Yes, I mean, without entering into the technicalities of what could be or should be a perfect calendar for leagues organization, I mean, in an ideal world, those that have created congestion, we need in the world an exercise of intellectual honesty on who created the problem to the calendar itself, right? And I think that the primary responsibility to address the problem that we have in the calendar should be addressed by those organizations that have congested the calendar, and they have created basically this problem to the ecosystem. And I think I don't need to name them in order for you to understand to whom I'm referring to. Having said that, I come back to the governance framework, right? We need a new regulatory framework, especially at FIFA level, where a system of co-decision, of collective agreement on those matters and issues that impact the whole ecosystem should be taken together by the various stakeholders, in this case, the players and the leagues, and this is not the case. And by the way, it's not that we are something. It's not that we are asking something that is out of the planet. At the end of the day, we are just asking the International Federation to respect EU law, right? Because there are ruling, more specifically the Super League ruling, that is asking exactly to International Football Federation in order to mitigate this conflict of interest that they have in being at the same time a competition organizer and a regulatory body, to implement a regulatory framework that is, among other things, transparent, proportionate, inclusive, right? And inclusive, it means to call at the table those bodies that represent the players, the leagues, and the clubs to take co-decision together for the benefit of the world game. This is not happening, and we will fight our own battle if it's needed in court. But before that, hopefully with some reasonable diplomacy.
Clear messages from Alberto and Maheta. Thank you both so much for your presence here and for sharing your expertise and insight on this crucial matter for the sustainability of the global game. Alberto Colombo and Maheta Molango. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, we are coming to the close of this football benchmark event. Before we do so, I'd like to call up here a couple of gentlemen to kind of conclude and give some final notes on a lot of the discussions we've seen here. And that is, of course, the founder and CEO of Football Benchmark, Andrea Sartori, also Riccardo Nasuti, strategic advisor from the Social Football Summit. So a few words from you, gentlemen, as we come to the close of this event that's seen several stakeholders, right, from the European football landscape talk about crucial issues when it comes to the value of the game, the growth of the game, and the sustainability of the game we love.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Just one comment on the very last panel. We very often speak about number of games, minutes played, back-to-back as a metric, but working for many years with FIFPro, with Alexander, we don't focus on working time. We don't realize how much these players are away from their family, the mental pressure that there is on these young guys. We shouldn't forget that they are young, and this constant play is putting enormous pressure on them, so both physically and mentally. Regarding the closing of the event, of course, Pedro, first of all, thanks to you for your great contribution, professionalism in the hosting. Thank you to the Social Football Summit team with whom we have partnered for this event. Of course, thank you to all the speakers, so to Maheta, Alberto, Alexander, Mirwan, the president of Como, and of course to Andrea Traverso. But of course, I cannot also avoid to thank my team for the great job that they've been doing over the years with the production of this and this report, and also in organizing this event. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and enjoy tomorrow final.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you to all the speakers, the guests here in the room, to the partner also. And first of all, I would like to bring the greetings of Gianfilippo Valentini, the CEO and founder of Social Football Summit, who is not here today for personal reason, but who strongly supported this event from the very beginning. And today, what has emerged from the discussion is that European football is living a moment of impressive growing and transformation. But this transformation, this moment, should be governed by sustainability, responsibility, and vision. So I think that today we have spoken about a lot of different topics like player welfare at the end, but then investment, club development, and a lot of different topics that are not longer separated, but they are all connected in a unique ecosystem. I think that the future of the football industry will be played on this kind of discussions. No, we need the football industry need something that can be sustainable from not only a financial point of view, but also from structural and human perspective. So I think that this event in Budapest, and this is why this kind of event matters, because bringing together leagues, institutions, clubs, I think it's the kind of dialogue the football industry needs in order to grow in the right way. And just to go into an end, this event in Budapest is part of a broader journey for Social Football Summit, all these kind of events, because we had before this one another event in Rome, another one in Florence. We will have other events in Milan and in London in the next months. And all these kind of events will lead to the main event that will take place in Turin, Italian Stadium, in November 10 and 11. And so I hope that every one of you can join this event. And the goal of all these kind of events is to, like we did today, to create the opportunities for connection and interaction within the football industry. So I hope that there will be just one occasion that we can have all together future conversation among the football industry. I would like to thank you, Football Benchmark, for partnership in this event, and above all, Andrea for his vision and his leadership in building this kind of interesting conversation. And thank you to Pedro for guiding this event with such quality and insight. So thank you, and thank you above all to you for being here. And I know that maybe now we have another moment with a coffee break.
Yep.
And so let's enjoy the rest of the weekend in Budapest.
Thank you, gentlemen. The countdown continues to tomorrow's big game. Thank you so much for everyone to being here today. Thank you. See you soon.